Next up, we have another platform occasion. We're going to have Peter Greenberger, who is the Managing Director of Emerging Markets for Twitter, who's going to be interviewed by Josh Noble of the Financial Times, who's been doing some great coverage of Occupy Central. So Josh, please come host and occupy the stage with Peter. Round of applause, please. Welcome.
Is this on?
There's a clicker.
Choose your seat. All right, thank you, Josh. My name is Peter Greenberger with Twitter, and I wanted to start, first of all, by talking a little bit about Twitter, just for a few minutes, and then we'll sit down and take questions to get a little bit deeper. We have this meme at Twitter about moments, and we actually do say that moments matter, so this is not just cleverly tied to the title of the conference here, but it's a happy coincidence. And as Simon mentioned, Twitter really does shine during big moments. I thought I'd share one recent big moment with you.
It had to be Neymar. Neymar scores. He has nerves of steel.
Julio Cesar now will want to be the hero.
Off the post. Brazil win in the most dramatic of circumstances.
So some of you may remember that moment. The blue line, of course, represents tweets. And as we see time and time again, people are actively dual screening. They're on their phones, they're on their devices while they're watching television, while they're at the game, while they're at the conference, tweeting about what they see in real time. Now, you may recall that, unfortunately for Neymar, the celebrations did not continue. He was unable to compete in the final game, but people were watching and people were tweeting. So here's a live visualization of people tweeting about the World Cup as this now infamous Brazil-Germany game occurred. The yellow is Brazil, the red is Germany. You can see the first goal, the second goal, the third goal, the fourth goal, the fifth goal. People were going crazy. What's amazing is that during the last World Cup, our engineers sat around just praying that Japan would not score, because every time Japan scored a goal, Twitter would go down. As you can see, we are very comfortable now fielding all sorts of tweets, no matter how many goals are scored. And so overall, Twitter really did come alive and proved how powerful it is during these huge global moments. You can see over just about a month, 64 matches, 672 million tweets, all about the World Cup. But what I think is more important and more interesting, certainly for brands who have to get up and go to work every day and reach your audience, is that there are these moments every single day. And the same advertisers who are interested in the World Cup might also be interested in the fact that people tweet about going for a run every single day. Now, they tend to tweet about it more at the beginning of the week than they do at the end of the week, but hope springs eternal, and every Monday we start tweeting about how we're going to go for a run that week. And so what I want you to keep in mind as we talk today and as you think about Twitter is that there are these billions of opportunities to engage with people who are talking about you, your brand, or topics that are of interest to you and your brand every single day. And with that, I'll sit down with Josh and we can get into the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Just to introduce myself, my name's Josh. I'm a reporter with the Financial Times. I normally write about financial markets, occasionally about civil disobedience, but I do spend basically 10 hours a day sitting in front of Twitter and another 5 hours a day on the sofa thumbing my way through Twitter. So I feel like I do have some questions to ask. I mean, the obvious first one for me is Beyonce. She's tweeted 8 times. She's got nearly 14 million followers. I've tweeted 11,000 times. I don't have nearly 14 million followers. So I'm thinking there must be an ingredient to a tweet. What makes a good tweet? How can I tweet better?
That's the age-old question. What makes a good tweet? So we've seen a number of different things about tweets that perform well. And I'd say the first is that it has to be, or it should be rather, real time. It is a real-time network. I think that's what sets us apart. from every other similar social platform. So making sure that your tweet is up to date, is fresh, is critically important. I think second of all, you want to be authentic, use your real voice. Whether that's as a journalist, as an individual, or as a brand, you do want to have this authentic conversation with people. Another thing to keep in mind is to be authentic and to be true and be real and be relevant to the conversation. And then also keep in mind that a tweet is not just 140 characters. There is room for a photo, there is room for a gallery of images, there is room for a video, there is room for an infographic, and we see time and again that content that includes a rich image or rich media tends to perform a lot better. So there are some tips not only for your brand, but also for your personal tweeting.
I mean, as a media provider, Twitter or social media in general seems quite straightforward. The product that we're selling is content. It's delivered through hyperlinks. If you're not just selling hyperlinks, if you're not just directing traffic, what makes a good Twitter strategy?
When we talk to brands about Twitter, and certainly sometimes the goal is driving traffic, whether that's for a publication or other brands who are looking to find that outcome. But we look at the content of the tweet, and what we have boiled it down to is a triangle, if you will, of content. And your tweet should seek to do one of three things, or two or three of these things. The first is to inform. Give people news, give people something of interest. If you're a brand, maybe that's a sale, or maybe that's a deal coming up. The second thing is you want to entertain, make people laugh, give them a reason to enjoy your content and perhaps to follow your account. And then finally, any help you can provide. So if you think about those three things, if you're doing one of them, that's good. If you're doing two or three, that's terrific. And that's a good way to think about your content strategy.
We were talking earlier, and you mentioned Pharrell's hat as a moment on social media. What did Pharrell's hat teach us?
Well, when you think about the content, you can have great content, but if you're not being strategic with it, then it may not work out for you. So another way that we think about Twitter when we're educating brands is to look at looking at this metric. So if you think of your marketing calendar in these terms, you've got things that are planned, you've got things that are unplanned, you've got an always-on strategy, and you've got an event-based strategy. And you can pretty much separate the world, at least in terms of marketing terms, into these four quadrants. So if I go forward one here, you can see some examples of this. So an example of an always-on, everyday strategy that's planned is that running example. We know that people are going to go running, or at least they're going to tweet about going running, every single day. You can have tweets prepared in advance for when people are talking about the run they're going to take. You are also going to have planned campaigns. In this case, this was the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes movie. Every brand has a calendar. You know when your products are coming out. Maybe there are seasonal things happening. Maybe there are launches. This is an opportunity to integrate what you're already doing on other media with those campaigns. Going around the clock here, of course, you see the famous Pharrell's hat. So he's at the Grammys. He's wearing this very dramatic hat. And of course, Arby's took the opportunity to tweet and say, hey, Pharrell, give us back our hat. It was brilliant. It was the most successful tweet of the evening. It was even better when Pharrell responded. Said, you all trying to start some roast beef, which of course, if you're an Arby's fan, is their signature sandwich. And of course, they won the night, just as Oreo won the night on the Super Bowl a year or two prior. And then finally, perhaps the hardest quadrant here is those things that happen that are unplanned, that just happen every day. You don't know there's an event happening, but something in the news pops. Oftentimes, this is when you call your PR agency, if it's a negative thing, but it can also be a positive opportunity for the brand. This is an example when Apple bought Beats for $3 billion. There was a local quick service restaurant in the United States who has a beet salad, and they tweeted out, we just spent $3 billion on some beets. Free salad for everybody. So this is a way to think about it. We recognize that being real time, being authentic, being good at Twitter takes a little bit of work. But if you use this metric, we think that any brand can be successful.
So you say any brand can be successful. What if I'm not selling headphones and I'm not selling hamburgers, but I'm selling jumbo jets or iron ore? Is there any point in me being on Twitter?
I would say there is. That might not surprise you. But I think there are a lot of advantages. And Andrew talked about this during the Microsoft presentation. The first, of course, is to listen. You want to be in the conversation. People are talking about your brand regardless of what you sell. You want to make sure that you're at least listening to that conversation as an early warning sign. Second of all, you want to build these relationships. Find your fans. Find the people who are interested in what you do and could be supportive. We've heard a number of different presentations today that mention this or reference even employees. You mentioned Boeing to me earlier. Boeing has a lot of employees who should and could be active for them on Twitter and on other social media. And then finally, you never know when you're going to need support. I come from a political background, and one thing that some of these big companies sometimes need is that support from outside, from their fans, from their followers, from their customers, or even just ambassadors. And social media is a great way to leverage that support.
Now, before I ask you a bit more about the political background, just want to say if anyone's got any questions, just stick your hand up and feel free to sort of jump in whenever. Otherwise, we will keep talking, but have a think if you do. So just tell us a bit more about, before you came to Twitter, you were working in DC, what were you doing, and how was social media relevant to it?
Sure. Well, I started out my career in Washington, D.C. working on political campaigns. So I spent about a decade or so working on American political campaigns around the United States. Spent some time in the Clinton White House, maybe the first Clinton White House. We'll see how it works out, but his Clinton White House. And I noticed pretty soon during my last few campaigns the prominent place that digital was occupying. And my last campaign was in 2004, and that's where we saw Howard Dean rise in the primaries, and it was very clear that something very special was happening. I went into digital. I ended up at Google for 4 years. I started and led their political sales business through the first Obama campaign. And then I looked around and recognized that something really dramatic was happening in politics. And there was a great article by a guy named Ben Smith, now with BuzzFeed, and he wrote and at the time, the prominent political blogger. And he said that the political blog is dead and Twitter has killed it. That politics had become a real-time sport and it was being played on Twitter. And that's when I headed over to Twitter to start our political operation there. Very recently, just 2 months ago, I moved over to Singapore looking for a new challenge, and my emerging markets include Russia and Greater China. So you could say that I'm still not so far away from geopolitics, at least.
We've got a question out in the audience here.
You. Peter, you've told us some fascinating, interesting stuff already, but your talk is about the ROI of Twitter, and it's kind of the one area you haven't really talked about yet, that I heard a lot of people outside say they were really looking forward to hearing about. So is there such a thing? I'll leave that question with you, and just let you know there's another great question behind you on the screen, too.
Let me address yours first. So thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely, and I think that the ROI, of course, depends on the objectives of the advertiser. And oftentimes, we can measure it by the specific objective. So we now have an opportunity to set up your campaign based upon what your ultimate goal is. Is it driving traffic? Is it conversions? Is it video views? Or is it something else? And through the dashboards, you can measure that very directly. So I would say that in terms of the ROI question, you can look at it through the native ROI of the platform, whether that's engagements or retweets or again, video views through the native video player. But you also can look at it through direct response. And so we now have a very fully built out suite of direct response tools. We have a mobile app promotion product now, so you can drive app installs on the platform, which has been very successful. We have a lead generation card, if you're looking for email addresses, has been very successful. And we have, as referred to earlier in the conversation on Weibo, we do in fact have a buy now button in early stages, just been released in the United States. And I think that you look at commerce as a potential big opportunity for us. And then I think for branding, and it's worth mentioning the TV and Twitter story here. I started off with that. And what we have seen in a number of different studies is that when you combine your television strategy with your Twitter strategy, favorability goes up, brand awareness goes up, intent to purchase goes up, and we've seen this time and time again. If you check out business.twitter.com, you can see a lot of these case studies, a lot of these ROI studies that we've shared. Thank you again for the question.
So we've got a question up behind as well from Candice. It's kind of the obvious question. How are you dealing with competition? Facebook keeps changing. As we were talking earlier, Twitter hasn't changed a huge amount in the last 8 years. So,
well, I would say that we are very much focused on our own business and how we want to grow it and how we want to serve our users. Twitter certainly has changed over the years, for those of you who have been on it. It's certainly a much more visual medium. There once was a time when it really was 140 characters. And though it still is, you now have the opportunity to put in these images, video, vines, and all sorts of rich content. So I see it, the platform is continually evolving, but we are very much focused on what we do. And it is worth noting, though, that what we do is unique in that we are the only live platform that is public and that is conversational. And if you think about those three circles, they intersect over Twitter, and no other platform has that power.
Another question up here for the Twitter agony uncle. How would an NGO use Twitter?
I would say an NGO could use it in very similar ways to a brand. We have had terrific success with NGOs on Twitter, from very small organizations to very large organizations. Certainly in times of crisis and catastrophe around the world, Twitter has come into great use and been hugely successful and helpful in solving those situations, or at least helping people to safety. And I'd be happy, again, to share with the questioner more specific examples, and there are examples on the website. But I think what is wonderful about the platform, again, the fact that it is so public and is live and conversational, it enables NGOs, even if they're not centrally located, to get people together to work in common cause. And there was a great recent example, actually, in the recent floods in Kashmir, where a handful of people just bonded together, met each other on Twitter, and were able to direct people and direct resources to where they were needed most. And this was a very decentralized method of dealing with a crisis in a different part of the world.
Just to tie some of these things together, I mean, ROI, your political background, NGOs, if you're selling ideas rather than products, how do you measure success?
One thing about Twitter is the influential user base. And I think that's something that has always been true with Twitter. You have a lot of reporters on Twitter. You have a lot of pundits on Twitter. We like to say that Twitter is not like Las Vegas. What happens on Twitter does not stay on Twitter. And by creating a persona, by becoming a thought leader on Twitter, you will see your tweets leap across the internet, embedded onto websites, on the bottoms of TV screens, talked about in the mainstream media. And I think it's a great opportunity to reach a much wider audience. And we talk a lot about that the influence of a tweet often goes well beyond Twitter. We saw, of course, the now iconic Ellen selfie. That was over 3 billion impressions that we can measure. Probably more. There aren't many people left, I imagine, on the planet who haven't seen that image, and that was a tweet. And so we think that it's a great way to reach a mass audience.
As someone who hosts a platform, how do you maintain that ecosystem and make sure that it's balanced and that it runs in a way that users don't feel bombarded by sales pitches?
Any good platform has to put its users first, and that is absolutely what we do. We want to make sure that our users are experiencing the platform, getting value out of the platform. In an ideal world, and in the world that we seek to create on Twitter, it would be a virtuous cycle. So if the brands are creating good tweets, as we talked about before, then that is a good experience. And one of the things that we're very proud about at Twitter is that our promoted tweets, which is the primary advertising product, receive on average 3 to 4 to 5% engagement rates. So if you think of that compared to your typical display advertising campaign, way in advance of what we've ever seen. And to us, that's an indication that it's valuable content. It's content that people are interested in. And if it's not receiving that high engagement, and if it's not valuable, the algorithm will stop serving it, and hopefully the advertiser will optimize the content.
Just finally, before we've got a question in the audience.
So in the US, you have very interesting demographics with a higher African-American audience than just about any other social medium. I'm wondering whether you have anything equivalent in other countries.
We have different levels of research in different countries, and some of which we share, some of which we don't. In the United States, we have always scored very high with African Americans, Latinos, those populations in the United States. We continue to do so, though in terms of the user base, it's gotten to a size where it more generally mirrors the population. I think it's true to say, though, that in most markets, you see often a younger demographic, frequently an urban demographic. Often, as I mentioned before, it's going to be an educated demographic, certainly mobile. I think as Weibo mentioned earlier, and he was accurate, our mobile user base is also about 75+% of our users access using mobile. So in general, that's how I would describe it. In terms of the interests and what people are doing on Twitter, TV, talking about televised events, talking about music, talking about sports, and talking about politics are often the things that people are doing. In most markets, you tend to see that at the top, and then a lot of people talking about every other issue under the sun. But that's a general picture of our user base.
I think that brings us, time is up, brings us to a close. I'm sure if anyone has any more questions for Peter, he'll be happy to answer them outside. Otherwise, thank you for listening.
Thank you.